So Marco, let's talk a little bit about TDF Metal Finishing. It's how long have you been there as the managing director now?
It's just over 4 years. The company was sold in May of 2021, and I came on in July 1st of that year. So just over 4 years, and it's been a long yet fast 4 years.
I was going to say a lot has changed. This was a family-owned organization, and you kind of
Yeah.
came in and took over the reins and been running it ever since then. We're going to talk about a couple different things that's kind of going on with you all. First of all, tell us all the let's general here. Let's talk about the processes, all that you all offer. What do you guys offer to the your customers?
Well,
What kind of
we are
services?
NADCAP accredited now
Hmm.
for anodizing, electroless nickel, chem films, silver plating, and a lot of passivate. We're doing a lot of passivate these days. So those are the NADCAP finishes. We also do tin and zinc. Actually doing some aerospace work right now in zinc.
Mm,
And we also do the black oxide class 4, sometimes called black
mm,
passivate. So we actually eliminated black oxide on steel. That's the class 1, and we're really focusing on the class 4 because we think it has a lot of growth potential. Not a lot of folks out there doing it, and we've really kind of mastered it. So we're doing a good job. So we're expanding our capabilities, and maybe not this upcoming NADCAP audit, but maybe the next one we'll add that to the NADCAP umbrella.
great. What kind of customers are using that black oxide that you're talking about there?
You
What
know, a
kind of
lot of
customers?
medical. It's not
Hmm.
so much on implants and things like that, but a lot of tools, a
Mm,
lot of instruments and things like that. Nothing that goes in the body, but stuff that is certainly in the operating room.
right.
So we do see a lot of that. We do see some aerospace applications. There are some optical uses for it where they want it to be stainless steel for the hardness or whatever, but they want it to be non-reflective and black
Right.
inside, and like in an optical at a camera or a microscope or a telescope type of application. So
Right.
we're seeing a fair amount of
Hmm.
that, and it's tricky. It has some challenges. It takes a little bit of a learning curve, to say the least. But it's a great finish when you get it right. It looks really good.
Right. Yeah, definitely interesting. Like I said, you got two new lines up, a titanium and a nickel. Tell us about those lines that you all have been etching line. Tell us about those that
Yep.
you've got up and running now. Yeah.
Sure. So, the Fenna Group is the organization that bought TDF, and we are
Hmm.
part of a bigger group now. And Hanson Aerospace, who is here in the industrial park with us, our sister company, we are doing titanium and nickel alloy etching for them. So we built a
Mm,
big line. It's actually two lines. One is for each of the two major aircraft engine manufacturers, and it does we so the parts go through a process where they get rough machined at Hanson. Then they get ultrasonic inspected to be sure that the forgings are okay to continue on. Then they get etched, and we check the grain structure, make sure that the grain of the titanium and nickel alloys looks good. It goes through fluorescent particle inspection. If it passes all of that, then it goes to final machining. But the
right.
lines are big, and it's some nasty acids. We've got hydrofluoric acid, nitric,
Mm,
ferric chloride, things like that in there. A lot of hydrochloric. So it's an aggressive process naturally if it's etching titanium and those specialty alloys. But we built a lot of safety features in. We built a lot of features into the line that protect the operator, work
hmm.
well with the air emissions and things like that. We have a big scrubber on it, and the line is holding up really well. The entire room that we put it in, and it's again the line is 65 feet long.
Mm,
It's all plastic. Even the suspended ceiling is made of
really?
plastic. So the
Wow.
walls, the ceiling, anything and everything that could be made of plastic is made of plastic in there, and including the lighting. And it's holding up well. Like I said, aggressive acids, they're going to take their toll. But overall, we're
Right.
very pleased with the performance and the built-in not only safety but also quality features in that line. There's a lot
Right.
of those little things. As one vendor that came in, and when I showed him the line, he said this line screams not my first rodeo, and I took that
Right.
as a great compliment.
Definitely, definitely. Where'd you find room for it in your facility to put that? How'd you move
Well,
things
the
around?
reason that the Fenner Group bought TDF was the proximity to Hanson,
Hmm.
the waste treatment system that was already existing that had capacity for a lot of additional processes. But behind us here, behind this wall, was an indoor soccer academy. And in
Okay.
2020, the pandemic put them out of business.
Mm.
So the previous ownership, with great foresight, and if there's anything you could say about the people that used to own TDF, a lot of foresight there. He took the space over, shared it with the machine shop across the parking lot, and it
Hmm.
became the attic, right? The place where do you want to
Right.
put these? We're not sure. Just put it up in the attic for now, and we'll deal with it later, right?
Right.
So there
Right.
was a lot of that, and it's a great space to have, but
Hmm.
plenty of room over there. It's a big room. It's about 8,000 to 9,000 square feet.
Mm.
So we were able to. The room is divided in half. Half of it is an enclosed area for the etching line, with the air scrubber and all of that. And then the other half outside is where the incoming and outgoing work is stored. It's where inspection is done, and it's where we put the fluorescent particle line as well. So
Right.
took great
That.
advantage of what you can picture as a
Right.
big empty room that had a soccer field in it,
There you go.
So
You got
yeah, yeah,
ingenuity there. Yeah, I was gonna
yeah.
say now you mentioned you're now NADCAP. And like I said, 4 years you've been there. Tell us about that undertaking. That had to be, I guess, from day one. That's what your target was, right? But it's not
It
easy,
was.
right? But
Yeah,
it's not
it isn't
easy,
easy.
right?
And
And tell us about that.
TDF,
Yeah.
great platers, great organization, really good infrastructure. But when you go from commercial ISO 9001, doing good quality work with
Hmm.
good quality procedures and processes, NADCAP is a whole nother level, right?
Hmm.
So we had a great foundation to build on, including the people and the platers that are out there. So we just had to, the Fenner Group was incredibly supportive as we went through this, right?
Hmm.
We basically changed every chemistry in the building, right?
Hmm.
Everything had to be updated, newer processes that were sure to meet NADCAP requirements. The lab, which
Right.
did a good job, it's a lab now, it's a lab on steroids, right?
Right.
We're analyzing tanks at three or four times the frequency that they were being analyzed before. Sometimes whether they need it or not, but
Right.
we're doing the
Hmm.
work. And the paperwork system goes from went from 2 pages to 5, 7, 9,
Hmm.
11. Depending on the process, and the added complications of newer materials and hydrogen embrittlement bakes and stress relief bakes, and all
Mm.
of the checking that needs to be done. So basically it was that rising tide that had to lift every ship at TDF,
Mm.
right? You know
Right.
what I mean? From the attention to the operators, to the skill level, to the analysis, consistency, to in
Hmm.
some cases the chemistry. So it really, and order entry, I'm looking at them now. Order entry, I used to joke back in the day that some companies could process an order faster than a NADCAP shop can even just enter the order,
And
and that is still true.
right.
That is still true. A commercial shop, you can get your chem film done. Hey, wait a minute, I'll go have a coffee. We'll go do it. But now, entering those orders and going through all of the specs and contract review has been quite the challenge. That's
Trying to
where
challenge on it.
that was the
Yeah.
most challenging area, really. It was order entry and contract review. Good
Right.
platers are good platers, but creating that paperwork and following the documentation and understanding the specifications and the materials, big challenge.
Right. Big challenge. I'd say another big challenge is, you're coming in there, with the staff that you've got, the team that you've got, people out on the floor. Um, did you have a tough time, or I would say a tough time, convincing them where you're going, how we're going to do this, and to get on board with all this? Because it had to be a change, right? It had to be a big change for everybody to kind of
Yeah.
grasp and understand. How did you go about that?
Well, communication is king, right? You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And making sure that everybody understood two things. One, that it had to be done. right? You
Hmm.
know what I mean? This is the
Right.
way business is done, right? So we had to make sure that they understood the importance of it. But then I think a big part of it was making sure that folks understood the opportunity, right? That,
Right. Hmm.
this is an opportunity to get your next raise, right? To be doing higher level work to help the company grow. And again, with the Fenner Group support, we made sure that everybody understood that and saw the opportunity and saw what they could do and where they could go with this. And most of the company rose to the occasion.
Right.
In a couple of
Hmm.
cases, they rose to the occasion and right out the door and on to bigger and better things, which, that's the risk, right? But, there
Right.
was a couple of folks that, I was mentoring, and, a good mentor, knows you're going to leave at some point, right? A
Right.
great
Right.
mentor hopes you do, right? So in some cases, that was really, good for them, right? Good for
Right.
them that they
Hmm.
moved on. And I always tell people, if you ever want to get a promotion, make sure there's somebody that knows your job, right? So,
Right.
backfilling has become good here. You know what I mean? It's something that
Hmm.
people understand. There isn't a lot of fear, like, well, if I show somebody else how to do that tricky silver plating, what am I going to do?
Right.
Well, I
Mm.
got trickier stuff over here, right? So let's
Right.
keep moving, let's keep elevating. So, I would say, everybody here that stayed, and we lost a couple,
Hmm.
some of them kind of loudly, but some people just don't like change. And so, but really it was the minority, very much of people. We only lost a couple that just said, I'm
Right.
not doing it this way, this isn't the way we've
Right.
done it. So, but everybody else is making more money today than they were then. Everybody else has changed their role and has grown. Our chemist is a great example of that. Mike had worked here for 7 years in the masking department,
Mm. Yeah. Hmm.
literally putting round plugs in round holes, right? You know what I mean?
Right.
And he was really good at it, and we do some incredible masking. But I've been around long enough to know a good lab guy when I see one. And I said to him, I said, "You're a lab guy." And he said, "I'm afraid." And I said, "No," you said, "You're a lab guy." I said, "Trust me on this." And I challenged him to not only become a chemist, but to become a NADCAP chemist. And 3 years later, he's a NADCAP chemist, and he's
Right.
really, really good at it. And he's getting paid for it. You
Right.
know what I
Yeah.
mean?
And
So
what is his name again? Mike.
Mike Lombardi, and
Mike Lombardi. Okay, great.
Mike
Yeah,
Lombardi,
started in
great
masking,
great
right?
guy.
I mean,
Yeah.
started in masking and got that. Great. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's got to send a message for the opportunity. I know you mentioned somebody else who was your sandblaster, right? Tell us that story. You had that somebody doing that work, and
Yeah,
what's he
yeah,
doing now?
that we had a guy in sandblasting, and his only request when I hired him was, "Can I wear one earbud while I work?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." You know what I mean? If that's what
Right.
keeps you in the sandblast booth for 8 hours, I'm all for it, right? But he was
Right.
really good at it, and because he was in the proximity of the ovens, it was kind of like, "Hey, let's ask Trevor to take care of the ovens too while he's down here." And then it
Right.
was, well, we put a laser down there, and the guy that was operating the laser, he left. It was like, maybe, and he taught himself the laser. You know what I
Mm.
mean? And
Hmm.
then it gets to the point where you're way too valuable to have anything to do with sandblasting, right? We need
Right.
you to train somebody else for that. Train somebody to work on the ovens. Train somebody to run the laser. And he's done all of that. And we sent him to school, and I gave him a challenge. By October 1st, you need to have your Massachusetts level 3 wastewater license.
Mm.
We paid for him to go to the school for it, and I expect that on that, if he doesn't make it, it's okay. We're not gonna cut him off at the knees. You know what I mean?
Right.
But that's another example of a guy that started at the bottom and worked his way into a great position. He's in a great spot. That he's a young man too. So does he want to be the chief operator someday? Where does he want to go
Right.
with it? And again, we created that opportunity, and we've really tried to do that for a lot of folks. You know what I mean? About a year ago or so now, I took a woman who didn't speak English, and I said, "We're putting her
Mm.
in order entry." And
Hmm.
everybody's like, I don't think that's such a good idea. I said, "No." I said, "We're doing it. This is what we're going to do." 6 months later, she speaks English, and we can't live without her. Right. You know what
Right.
I mean? Not only is she the backup order entry person, she's taken on a huge chunk of the contract review. She's leading our safety program.
Mm.
when we play safety bingo here, right? And if your number gets drawn and you get to 5, you can win. The most we've given out is like $325. We start the
Wow.
pot at 250, and we add $25 a week till somebody wins. But if you're caught without your PPE, well, you're -1 bingo, right? If you get caught a second
Right.
time in that
Mm.
period, you're out of the bingo game, right? So, you don't
Right.
want to be the one that would have won $300, except at that time that, you didn't have your glasses on and you got, we had to write you up for it.
Right.
And she
Exactly.
leads that, and it's hugely successful, and I give her all the credit. So creating those opportunities for people, even when it doesn't seem like a good fit.
Right.
Most of the time
Hmm.
people rise to the occasion, and
Right.
we've done that in the plating room, in the masking room, in the laser. Somebody's running that laser now, and she's doing a great job with it. So
Right.
I think
And you got
finding the
these.
right people.
Yeah, I was gonna say you got this apprentice program. Tell us about that. How you get involved in that? How it helps you.
So when I first came here, I had gone through a executive leadership program, and my project was going to be workforce training, right?
Mm-hmm.
And right as my project was going to start to really begin, the pandemic hit. And
Mm.
the big part of that workforce training was I wanted to go into smaller shops. Because all of the big companies, there's an HR person who's working on workforce training, who's getting grants and stuff like that. So, but when you're running a plating shop, you can leave here at 6 o'clock at night in the middle of the winter and ask yourself, when did it snow? Right? You know what I mean? I've been inside these four walls all day. I have no idea what's going on out there.
Right.
So we really became a quest. I said, well, I talked the talk. I said I was going to do this on a bigger scale. I ought to
Hmm.
be able to do it for one company instead of a bunch, right?
Right.
So
Right.
I pulled a thread and connected the dots, which was the whole mission of my workforce training program. And slowly but surely, we got Mass Hire in here. We got the Northeast
Hmm.
Advanced Manufacturing Council in here.
Mm.
They had money. They gave us grants. They provided connections to the companies that did the training, that understood the billing, right? Because
Hmm.
it's one thing to say, yeah, I'm going to sign up for $25,000 worth of training. But you got to keep that paperwork straight. And we worked with some really good people that really helped us with that.
Right.
And
Hmm.
we have two young men that have gone through the program. Actually, there was a young woman too that went through the program, advanced, and went on to bigger and better things. And super
Mm.
happy for her. But Zach is another one that just completed 150 hours of external training.
Mm.
And a bunch of hours on the job training. He met all of the requirements, and he satisfied the state of Massachusetts. So he is now a certified apprentice. And
Really?
he,
Okay.
he went through all kinds of quality training and a lot of really good training too, like lean training and problem solving and communication and customer service, right? All the areas
Mm.
that his role touches, right? You know what I mean? So
Right.
so he did really well with that. And now we have a young man, Jameson. He's 20 years old, and he's our quality administrator, and
Mm.
he's going through that same training. And in fact, through all of this, we were connected to a program with MIT, and
Mm.
they are trying to create manufacturing technologists, right? What's a
Wow.
manufacturing
Right. Yeah.
technologist?
What
It's
is
not the
that?
hands-on people on the floor, and it's not the engineers upstairs in Mahogany Row that wouldn't know how to hold a part to plate it if you held a gun to their head, right? So
Right.
it's those in-between people that have that hands-on knowledge, but have enough knowledge that they can communicate and work with the engineers as well. So
Mm.
Jameson, and again, this is through the state of Massachusetts, and MIT is going to UMass Lowell
Hmm.
two days, one day and one night a week. And he's participating in the manufacturing technologist program. So we're advancing him through that program as well. And all of this was provided, done by grants. Done with the
Wow.
support of the Fenner Group, because it is all reimbursed stuff. So we got a fair amount of cash out of pocket at any given time, right? But we do get reimbursed as long as we keep that paperwork straight. And it's a tremendous program, and the more of that they see that, the more other people on the floor are like, hey, what can I do?
What can I
What
do?
can
Yeah.
I
What's available for me? Right. Yeah.
what's my opportunity? And it sounds crazy, right? But I took two women in masking, and again, non-English speaking, and that's okay. I always say we're not a bilingual company. We're a Spanish speaking company, right? So if you come here, you best speak Spanish, right? But they go out, they control all the inventory now for all of the, not the chemicals and such, but the gloves and the aprons and the masking and the toilet paper and the light bulbs and the Scotch Brite, all the stuff that you run out of, right? That, like, when you really
Right.
need it, you realize that Scotch Brite box on the shelf is empty, right? And they're controlling that, and it might be a small thing, but when your job is masking, it's little harder to advance you. You know what I mean? Once you get
Right.
past, you're our best masker, or you're one of our best maskers. So to give
Hmm.
them that responsibility and authority, and the ability to say, hey, we need to place an order, we need to do this. It's momentum, right? People, you can
Right.
pay somebody to stand in that spot, right? But they
Right.
have to give you their mind, right?
Right.
You know what I mean? And
Exactly.
creating
Hmm.
these opportunities provides an opportunity for people to say, hey, if we could do it this way, it'll be better. I can do more work if I do it this way. And, it was a long time ago here at
Right.
TDF that I said, I'm not asking anybody to work harder. Everybody works hard. Let's work smarter. Let's find better ways. Let's build
Right.
better
Hmm.
systems that don't allow
Right.
those mistakes to happen, that don't allow us to even the little things like run out of Scotch Brite. Because what happens when you run out of Scotch Brite, right? You grab the maintenance guy and he runs to Home Depot. There's at least 2 Dunkin' Donuts on the way, right? You know what I mean? There's
Right.
probably 3 more on the way back, right? And a trip to Home Depot, it costs an hour. Yeah, it's only $30 for the Scotch Brite, but you're one of your key guys is out of the building
Is
for an
out of the
hour.
building.
When there's a cost for that, and when it happens multiple times a week, it adds
Right.
up
You got to
quick.
fix
You
that.
know what
Yeah.
I
You got to
mean?
fix that. Yeah. I was gonna say, what's
Yeah,
funny is
yeah.
that uh, yourself, like I said, a lot of these change. I know a lot of people would be, running an operation, managing director would come in and really almost focus on, bringing in the business. But it looks like you've kind of take a wider approach of, of making sure your team is satisfactory, making sure your processes are up to date. How's that been for you? You know, personally, you're of trying to get this done. It had to be like drinking from a fire hose, it seems, at some point. But to put all those things, all those
Yeah.
balls you were juggling together, and you're seeing it come to fruition now, right? But couldn't been easy.
Well,
Could not have been easy to do that. But
No, it wasn't. And, I have on occasion said, you can't put 6 pounds of sugar in a 5-pound bag without something hitting the floor, right? You know what I
right.
mean? And at one point, I was building the big etch line. We were creating the culture that we needed to have while we were implementing NatCap.
Mm,
Right. And
right.
any one of those three things would have been a really kind of cool, fun job. You know what I
Right.
mean? All three of
But
them,
all three at once.
it was a lot. You know what I mean? And it was a big
right.
relief to get that line done. It was a big relief to get the first NatCap, to get the NatCap approval. And it's been a credit to everybody in this company that they were willing to come along. You know what I
Right.
mean? That, there
Mm,
was a lot of trust, I think, in me and in the decisions that we were making, and in the information that I was giving them. You know what I
mm,
mean? That, hey guys, if we do this, we're gonna win, right? We're gonna be okay. You're gonna be okay.
right.
You know what I mean? And I don't want to make it sound crazy, but at one point, somebody said to me, he goes, all right, he goes, well, I'll do my best. He goes, most of the decisions you made are paid off. He said, so I'm with you. I'll try to make this work for you. And that's a big thing, right? You can say, thou shalt be NADCAP, right? But the
right.
people on the
Hmm.
floor are the ones living it, right? You know what I mean? And more
Exactly.
than
Yeah.
once, I've had to ask, like, you sure that this is something that we can do, that we can sustain? If this is how we write up this procedure, is this really what you want? And it's never
Right.
what they want, but is it what they can live with? Is it doable?
Hmm.
Is it sustainable? And a lot of really, really good folks. And I think one of the things I did, with help, with advice, was create a leadership team that wasn't
Hmm.
me. Right. You know what I
Right.
mean? I,
Hmm.
I, I took 3 guys in the shop, 3 venerable veterans, and said, you guys are the leadership team here. So, I'm going to talk to
Hmm.
you, and then you got to go, go bring it to the floor, right? You know what I mean? I
Right.
don't, I'll talk to anybody here, but it's going to be best coming from somebody that they've known for 30 years, right? That they
Right.
trust, that they respect, and taught them a lot of things. And if the leadership team says, hey, you know, this is the way it's got to be done, then most of them came
Hmm.
along. Most of them came
Right.
along.
Yeah.
You know,
How many people do you have? How many people you have working for you now there at the
we're
TDF Metal?
just over 30. You know what I mean? We've got a
Hmm.
couple of part timers that we use. That we've got a couple
Hmm.
of very intelligent and capable women who work mothers' hours, right?
Mm.
Who we wouldn't be able to afford or even hire under any other circumstances, other than we give them flexibility, and they help us tremendously. You know what I mean? The woman
Right.
that's
Yeah.
running the laser right now is working mother's hours. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
But she's able to do things on the laser that we weren't sure we'd ever be able to do. And it's
Right.
created great
Exactly.
opportunities for us, not only in business but in masking. It solves a lot of masking problems as well.
Right.
So by
That's
being flexible, by being open to, I was on a board one time, and the CEO of that board called them MBA moms, right? You know what I mean? And that's, we got a couple that kind of fall into that category. So it's been good. And being creative, and finding opportunities for them as well.
right.
It can be
Exactly.
rough at when February vacation rolls around, and we've got a couple of people that aren't here for the week, but we find ways.
Right, right.
Find
Like I
ways.
said, it seems like 4 years has gone by real fast with a lot of things. What's on your drawing board next couple of years? What do you got planned? Anything that writing off the NADCAP and the new lines or anything? Anything that's on your chalkboard of what you're planning to do with that, or
Well,
anything
it's
new?
it's
Or
continue to expand the NADCAP business, and create opportunities for new customers and new business. Like I said, black passivate, class 4
mm,
black oxide is a direction that we think is a good one to go in. To our NADCAP scope, we're actually adding sulfamate nickel, tin, and zinc.
mm,
Because not because there's a ton of work out there, but when it comes to sulfamate nickel, and I'm going to be frank here. When I called our supplier and I said, hey, I got some questions on sulfamate nickel. The response I got, and it was kind of kidding, was like, not only are they all retired, but some of them are dead, right? You know what I mean?
right,
There isn't a lot of expertise there.
right,
So sulfamate nickel, I'm looking at it saying, well, not a lot of folks out there that have done the sulfamate nickel. I mean, I can go back to when we were electroforming dashboards in New Hampshire, that were, creating the molds for dashboards out of sulfamate nickel. There's not too many people left in the business that can say
right.
they saw that, right? You know what I mean?
Exactly.
And
Hmm.
kind of understand the ductility and the heat resistance and all of that stuff. So we've got, TDF has kind of become the old horse farm, right? In that, we also have, including myself, we have Gary Smith, John
Hmm.
Miller, and Tom
Hmm.
Moore. And the four of us add up to over 200 years in plating,
Wow,
right?
wow. That's
And
yeah.
the other three guys are working part time, but they all bring invaluable experience and knowledge that you can't buy. You can't, it's going to take years. So, Gary has become an integral part of our quality team, and contract review, and, helping us understand and write up orders. When heat treated music wire comes in for zinc plating, we understand. You know what I mean? We get it.
Right,
Yeah, there's a lot of guys
right.
out there doing zinc plating, right? But understanding that metal. We're doing internal anode plating on warheads in
Mm,
zinc. You know what I mean?
mm,
So like I said, a lot of folks out there doing zinc, but not a lot of folks understand the
right.
intricacies of we're getting 6/10 on the outside and 6/10 on the inside. And Gary's experience and knowledge in that has been tremendous. Tom
Instrumental.
Moore, he helped us rebuild this entire factory. Facilities
Mm,
was a real strong strength of his, and he has been instrumental in our infrastructure and rebuilding. It was 20 years. It was a 20-year-old company, a factory, when Fenner Group bought it, and Tom helped us modernize that, and fix and adjust and create a lot of great opportunities. And Johnny Miller, with 40 years of experience in wastewater treatment, he dropped right in, and, he's our chief operator.
Mm,
And, Johnny works Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, loves his
mm,
hours. You know what I mean? Gary's here Tuesday and Thursdays. He loves that hours. And Tom's here, for a half a day
right.
on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. You know what I mean? Great,
Mm,
and it's great for me because sometimes when you hit the wall, right, and you say,
right.
what would you do? You ran a
Right.
company. What would you
Right.
do? How would you
Right.
handle this situation? Johnny, what do you think about, the way we want to put in a better cleaner because we know that it's going to do a much better job for us. You know what I mean?
Mm,
But how do we manage that waste stream wise? You know what I mean? Introducing a cleaner
right.
that is maybe more heavily chelated than the system would like to see. And
Right.
working with Johnny, it's like, oh, we can do this, we can do
Right.
this. So
Mm.
the old horse farm, I'm the next one to go out a part-time 3 days a week. I'll do sales and pricing for you. What do you think about that schedule? Still a couple years away, but I think that approach has been great. And these guys, they fit the budget, and we fit their budget, we fit their needs, and we offer them great flexibility as well.